The Galactic Academy of Xenobiology was known throughout the 5 spiral arms as the most prestigious institution for studying alien life forms. Its massive chrome and crystal towers reached toward the purple sky of Planet Education 7, housing thousands of students from hundreds of different species. However, today was special. It was the first day a human would join their faculty. Professor Mark stood at the entrance of the Xenobiology lab, his simple cotton shirt and cargo pants standing out among the shimmering biosuits worn by his alien colleagues. At just under 6 feet tall, he was shorter than most of the staff, but there was something about his calm demeanor that drew attention. The class he would be assisting in was Advanced Predator Studies, taught by the renowned Professor Blue, so named for his brilliant azure scales. The classroom was filled with 30 students from various species, some with multiple eyes, others with tentacles, and a few that were basically sentient clouds of gas contained in environmental suits. "Class, this is our new teaching assistant from Earth," Professor Blue announced, his translator converting his clicks and whistles into standard galactic common. "He will be helping us with today's practical demonstration on apex predators." The students buzzed with excitement and anxiety. Humans were still relatively new to the galactic community, and stories about their planet's incredibly dangerous wildlife had spread quickly. Some said these primitives somehow managed to survive on a death world filled with creatures that would give nightmares to even the most hardened space travelers. Professor Mark smiled warmly at the class. "Today, we'll be working with a specimen from the Centaurian system. The lab has acquired a juvenile razor wolf." A collective gasp filled the room. Even juvenile razor wolves were known to be extremely aggressive, with claws that could slice through standard protective gear like paper. Several students instinctively activated their defensive shields. The teaching assistant walked to a reinforced containment unit at the back of the room. Through its transparent walls, they could see a creature about the size of a large earth dog, but with 6 legs, metallic scales, and 3 rows of sharp ridges running down its back. Its eyes glowed an angry red as it paced back and forth. "Now, watch carefully," Mark said, reaching for the containment unit's controls. "The key to handling dangerous predators is understanding their psychology and showing them you're not afraid." The alien students watched in horror as the human calmly opened the containment field. What happened next would become legendary at the Academy, sparking a series of events that would change how the galaxy viewed humanity forever. The razor wolf leaped from its containment unit with frightening speed, its metallic scales gleaming under the laboratory lights. Several students screamed in their native languages, while others froze in place. Professor Blue's scales shifted to a pale green, a sign of extreme stress among his species. But Mark didn't flinch. He stood his ground, maintaining direct eye contact with the predator. The razor wolf circled him, all 3 rows of its spinal ridges fully extended, a clear threat display. Its claws left small scratches in the reinforced floor with each step. "Notice its body language," Mark said calmly, as if he were discussing the weather. "The raised ridges, the low head position, the way it's testing me by circling. It's not attacking yet, it's evaluating whether I'm prey or a threat." The class watched in stunned silence as their teaching assistant slowly reached into one of his cargo pants pockets. The razor wolf's ears perked up at the movement, but Mark's steady gaze never wavered. "On Earth, we have a saying, most predators don't want a fight, they want a meal. The trick is convincing them you're not worth the effort." He pulled out what appeared to be a simple metal tube about the length of his hand. The razor wolf's eyes locked onto the object. "This is something we developed on Earth for training large predators," Mark explained. "It emits frequencies that most predatory species find interesting. Watch." He clicked a button on the tube, and while the students heard nothing, the razor wolf's behavior changed instantly. Its ridges lowered slightly, and its circling slowed. Its glowing red eyes dimmed to a curious orange. "Now comes the crucial part," Mark said. "When dealing with pack predators like the razor wolf, you need to establish yourself as neither prey nor enemy, but as a potential pack leader. he took a slow step forward. The razor wolf growled, showing rows of serrated teeth. A few students near the front of the class tried to back away, but Mark raised his free hand. "Stay still," he commanded. "Sudden movements will only trigger its hunting instincts." What happened next left the entire class in awe. Mark began a series of subtle movements, small gestures with his hands, slight shifts in his posture, and carefully timed blinks. The razor wolf's growling gradually ceased, and its body language began to mirror Mark's calm demeanor. Different species have different social cues, he continued teaching, even as he worked. But most pack predators share certain universal signals. By demonstrating confidence without aggression, and strength without threat, you can establish a basic form of communication. After several tense minutes, the razor wolf's spinal ridges completely retracted, a sign of submission. It approached Mark slowly, and to the class's amazement, sat down beside him like an obedient pet. "On Earth, we've lived alongside predators for our entire history," Mark said, reaching down to pat the razor wolf's head. The creature leaned into his touch, its scales making a soft clicking sound. "We've learned to understand them, respect them, and in many cases, work with them. This understanding has been key to our survival." Professor Blue's scales had gradually returned to their normal azure color. "Remarkable," he said, moving closer to inspect the now docile razor wolf. "In all my years of xenobiology, I've never seen anything quite like this." The students began to emerge from their frozen states, their fear turning to fascination. One brave soul, a floating crystalline being named Spark, raised what passed for their appendage. "But sir," they chimed, "I thought razor wolves were impossible to tame. The Galactic database lists them as Class 5 dangerous creatures." Mark smiled. "The galaxy is full of impossible things. Humans have a long history of doing what others consider impossible. Sometimes, the only difference between impossible and challenging is having the right approach." As he guided the razor wolf back to its containment unit, the students began taking furious notes. They had just witnessed something that would challenge everything they thought they knew about both predator psychology and humans in general. But this was only the beginning of their education. News of the razor wolf demonstration spread through the Galactic Academy like wildfire. By the time the next class session began 3 days later, the lecture hall was packed to capacity. Students from other departments had begged for permission to observe, and even several senior faculty members lined the back wall. Mark noticed the attention but maintained his casual demeanor as he organized his teaching materials. Today's lesson would be even more interesting than the last, but first, he needed to address the questions burning in everyone's minds. "I see we have quite a few visitors today," he said, looking around the crowded room. "Professor Blue has kindly agreed to let me start with a Q&A session about Earth's approach to dangerous creatures." Dozens of appendages, tentacles, and light signals shot up immediately. Mark pointed to a tall, insectoid student whose antennae were quivering with excitement. "Is it true that humans keep predators in their homes?" the student chittered through their translator. "As companions?" Mark pulled up a holographic image of an Earth living room. In it, a large German shepherd dozed on a couch while a cat lounged on the windowsill. "These are dogs and cats, descendants of wolves and big cats. For thousands of years, we've lived with them, bred them, and formed deep emotional bonds with them." The room erupted in murmurs. A gelatinous student near the front rippled in disbelief. "But how did your species survive long enough to develop such relationships?" "Our historical data suggests Earth has an unusually high concentration of predatory species. That's actually why we survived," Mark explained, switching to a new hologram showing early human settlements. "We learned early that understanding predators was crucial for survival. We studied them, learned their behaviors, and eventually found ways to work together. Some helped us hunt, others protected our settlements, and over time, they became part of our families." A crystalline being pulsed with blue light, their species' way of showing confusion. But the Razor Wolf demonstration, you use technology to control it. Mark shook his head. The sonic device helped, but it wasn't controlling anything. Think of it like speaking their language. The real key was understanding and respecting the Razor Wolf's nature. Technology just helped bridge the communication gap. Professor Blue, who had been quietly observing, stepped forward. Perhaps a practical demonstration would help. Mark, would you be willing to show them your personal companion? The human smiled and pressed a small button on his wrist device. A door at the back of the lecture hall slid open, and heavy footsteps echoed through the room. The aliens turned to look, and several gasped in shock. A massive earth wolf padded into the room, its black and gray fur gleaming, yellow eyes alert but calm. Unlike the Razor Wolf, this creature moved with a quiet grace that somehow seemed even more intimidating. It was clearly a predator, but one that was completely at ease in this environment. "This is Shadow," Mark said as the wolf calmly walked to his side. "He's been with me since he was a pup. No sonic devices, no control implants, just trust and understanding built over years." To demonstrate, Mark ran through several complex commands. Shadow responded perfectly, showing both intelligence and willing cooperation. When Mark gave permission, several braver students even got to approach and touch the wolf's fur, marveling at the creature's gentle demeanor. "The galaxy sees Earth as a death world," Mark continued, scratching behind Shadow's ears. "And yes, our planet has shaped us into survivors. But it also taught us something invaluable, the ability to bridge gaps between species, to find understanding where others see only danger." A faculty member from the xenopsychology department raised a spindly arm. Could these techniques be adapted for other species? For dealing with other dangerous creatures across the galaxy? Mark's eyes lit up. "That's exactly what I'm here to explore. Humanity's experience with Earth's predators gives us a unique perspective. We've learned that most creatures, no matter how dangerous they seem, can be understood if you approach them the right way." He paused, looking around the room. "In fact, that's what we'll be demonstrating next week. The Academy has given us permission to work with something a bit more challenging than a Razor Wolf." The room buzzed with excitement and apprehension. What could be more challenging than a Razor Wolf? As the students discussed possibilities, none of them noticed Shadow's ears perking up, sensing something in the distance that only he could detect. Something that would soon test not just Mark's skills, but the entire Academy's understanding of both humans and predators. The warning sirens began during the middle of the next week's lecture. Shadow had been growing increasingly restless throughout the morning, and now Mark understood why. The wolf's ears were flat against his head, and a low growl rumbled in his chest. "Emergency protocol activated," the Academy's AI announced in multiple languages. "Containment breach in Section 7B. All students and faculty must evacuate immediately." The alien students began to panic, but Mark's voice cut through the chaos. "Everyone stay calm and move in an orderly fashion toward the emergency exits." His commanding tone had an immediate effect, helping prevent a stampede. Professor Blue's scales had turned a pale green again. "Section 7B, that's where they keep the Class 6 specimens. The ones too dangerous for regular study." As if on cue, a terrible screeching sound echoed through the corridors. It was followed by the sounds of breaking glass and crumpling metal. Whatever had escaped was big, and it was getting closer. "Professor," Mark said quickly, "get these students to safety. Shadow and I will help the security teams." "But the creature that escaped?" Professor Blue's translator crackled with stress. "It's a star stalker. We only captured it last month. No one has ever successfully contained one without heavy weaponry." The students who recognized the name gasped in horror. Starstalkers were among the most feared predators in known space, massive creatures that hunted in the void between stars, able to survive in both space and atmosphere. Their natural armor could resist most weapons, and their hunting instincts were legendary. Mark's expression remained focused. All the more reason to handle this carefully. A cornered predator is the most dangerous kind. He turned to Shadow, who was already alert and ready. "Think you can help me track it, boy?" The wolf's response was a quiet woof, his nose already working to catch the scent. Mark quickly pulled up the Academy's layout on his wrist device, studying possible containment points. "The creature's probably confused and frightened," he explained as he worked. "This environment is nothing like its natural habitat. It'll be looking for open space, trying to get out." He pointed to a large chamber on the map. "The Grand Atrium, that's where it's heading. It has a transparent dome ceiling. The Starstalker will see the sky and try to break through." Professor Blue's scales shifted to a worried purple. "The dome isn't strong enough to contain it. If it breaks through, it could devastate the surrounding city." "Then we'll have to stop it before it gets there," Mark said, checking his equipment. He still had the sonic device from the Razor Wolf demonstration, plus a few other tools he'd brought from Earth. "Professor, once the students are safe, have security set up a perimeter around the atrium. But tell them not to engage unless absolutely necessary. This needs a subtle approach." As the professor led the students away, Mark heard the whispers of amazement. Here was a human, planning to face one of the galaxy's deadliest predators with nothing but simple tools and a wolf companion. Many thought he was walking to his death, but a few remembered the Razor Wolf demonstration and wondered if they were about to witness another impossible feat. Mark knelt beside Shadow, checking the wolf's protective vest, a lightweight but strong material he'd brought from Earth. "Ready for a challenge, partner?" The wolf's steady gaze and alert posture were all the answer he needed. They moved through the corridors strategically, following Shadow's nose and the trail of destruction. The Starstalker had torn through walls like paper, leaving twisted metal and sparking circuits in its wake. Security cameras caught glimpses of its massive form, a creature like a cross between a manta ray and a tiger, with iridescent scales that seemed to bend light around it. As they got closer, Mark could hear its movements, the scratch of claws on metal, the frustrated screeches as it searched for escape. Shadow walked silently beside him, completely focused on the hunt. They were nearly to the atrium when Mark's wrist device buzzed with an urgent message from Professor Blue. "Security reports the creature is becoming more agitated. They estimate 5 minutes before it reaches the dome. Whatever you're planning, it needs to happen now." Mark took a deep breath, double-checking his equipment one last time. "Understood. Tell them to be ready, but remember, no aggressive moves unless I signal." He looked down at Shadow, who met his gaze with unwavering trust. "Let's go show the galaxy another impossible thing." The Grand Atrium of the Galactic Academy was a marvel of architectural design, its crystal dome stretching hundreds of feet into the sky. But right now, that beautiful dome was about to become a serious problem. The Starstalker had arrived there first, its massive form casting shifting shadows as its light-bending scales reflected the purple sky above. Mark and Shadow entered quietly through a side door. The creature was even more impressive up close, easily the size of a small shuttle, with a wingspan of 30 feet and a body that seemed to ripple between visibility and near transparency. Its 6 eyes scanned the room constantly, and its razor-sharp tail whipped back and forth in agitation. "Easy now," Mark whispered, more to himself than to Shadow. The wolf stayed perfectly still beside him, waiting for signals. Through his earpiece, Mark could hear the security teams taking positions outside, but he knew their weapons would only make things worse. The Starstalker suddenly turned all 6 eyes toward them. Its natural camouflage flickered, revealing patterns of bioluminescent markings across its skin, a warning display. The creature opened its mouth, showing rows of teeth evolved to tear through spacecraft hulls. Mark's mind raced through everything he knew about space-dwelling predators. "It's used to hunting in 3 dimensions," he muttered. "Here, it feels trapped. Limited. Scared. He slowly reached for his sonic device, but the Starstalker's tail slammed into a nearby pillar, sending cracked spiderwebbing through the metal. Okay, different approach. Mark took a careful step forward, keeping his movements smooth and deliberate. Shadow matched his pace perfectly, years of training evident in every step. The Starstalker watched them, its massive head weaving from side to side. You hunt between the stars, Mark said calmly, knowing that even if the creature couldn't understand his words, it would respond to his tone. You're used to the quiet. The empty. The freedom. He gestured slowly to their surroundings. This must feel like a cage to you. The creature's bioluminescent patterns shifted, blues and greens rippling across its skin. Its tail movement slowed slightly. Mark recognized the change in body language, the first sign of communication. He pulled out a small projector from his pocket, activating it with careful movements. A hologram appeared between them, a star field, accurate and detailed. The Starstalker's attention locked onto it immediately, all 6 eyes focusing on the familiar sight. That's your home, Mark continued, using the projector to show the creature's known hunting grounds. We're not trying to trap you. We just need to find a safe way to get you there. The security teams watched in amazement through their cameras as the human continued his impossible task. The Starstalker's aggressive posture was gradually changing, its movements becoming less erratic as it focused on the star field projection. Shadow, reading the situation perfectly, lay down in a submissive posture. The wolf's action caught the creature's attention, and Mark saw his opportunity. He slowly added to the hologram, showing a path, a way out that wouldn't involve destroying the dome and the city below. There's a spacecraft bay 3 levels down, he explained, letting the hologram demonstrate. Big enough for you. Open to space. The Starstalker's tail had stopped its agitated movements, now swaying almost hypnotically as it watched the projected path to freedom. But just then, something went wrong. A piece of damaged ceiling, weakened by the creature's earlier rampage, broke free and crashed to the floor. The sudden noise shattered the careful calm Mark had been building. The Starstalker's camouflage flared wildly, its peaceful patterns replaced by aggressive reds and yellows. It reared up, mouth open in a screech that shook the entire atrium. Its tail whipped around, heading straight for Mark. Shadow leaped instantly, not to attack, but to push his human partner out of the way. They rolled together as the tail smashed into the floor where they'd been standing. The security teams started shouting in their earpieces, preparing to breach the atrium. No! Mark commanded, both to the teams and to Shadow, who was now standing protectively over him. Don't attack. Stand down. He struggled to his feet, facing the agitated creature. The Starstalker was between them and the exit, its massive form blocking most of the room. The hologram projector lay crushed on the floor, and the dome above creaked ominously as the creature's tail lashed against the walls. Mark had seconds to prevent disaster. Everything he'd taught his students about handling predators had worked up to this point, but now he needed something more. Looking into the Starstalker's 6 frightened, angry eyes, he prepared to try something that no human had ever attempted with a creature of this size and power. In that crucial moment, Mark did something that made every security officer watching the feeds gasp in shock. He stepped away from Shadow's protection and sat down cross-legged on the floor, directly in front of the enraged Starstalker. It's okay, he said softly, keeping his hands visible and his posture relaxed. Everything about this place is wrong for you, isn't it? The gravity, the confined space, the noise. He closed his eyes, demonstrating complete vulnerability to the apex predator before him. The Starstalker paused its rampage, all 6 eyes fixed on this strange creature that wasn't running or attacking. Its tail still whipped through the air, but the movement was slower now, more cautious than aggressive. Mark continued speaking in the same calm tone he'd used during the Razor Wolf demonstration. On Earth, we learned something important about predators. The most dangerous ones aren't the biggest or strongest, they're the ones that can think, plan, and adapt. He opened his eyes slowly, meeting the creature's gaze. Like you. Like us. Shadow, understanding his role perfectly, lay down beside Mark, maintaining the picture of calm submission. The Starstalker's bioluminescent patterns shifted again, the angry reds fading into curious purples and blues. "You're not just strong," Mark said, carefully reaching into his remaining pocket. "You're intelligent. You navigate between stars. You plan your hunts. You learn." He pulled out a small device, not the sonic tool this time, but something different. When he activated it, it projected not just stars, but complex gravitational fields and solar winds, the invisible currents of space that the Starstalker used to hunt. The creature's patterns pulsed with recognition. It lowered its massive head, bringing it closer to the projection. Mark didn't flinch as the teeth that could tear through metal came within feet of him. "That's right," he encouraged. "This is your element. Your territory. And we can help you return to it." He slowly expanded the projection, showing a clear path through the Academy's lower levels to the spacecraft bay. The Starstalker's tail finally stilled, its attention completely captured by the familiar space patterns. In the observation room, Professor Blue and the gathered students watched in amazement as Mark slowly stood up. The Starstalker didn't react aggressively, its patterns had settled into calm blues and greens. With careful movements, Mark began walking toward the atrium's far door, maintaining the space projection. Shadow walked beside him, and the massive creature followed, drawn by the familiar stellar patterns. Sometimes, Mark explained later to his stunned class, the best way to handle a predator isn't through dominance or technology. It's through understanding. The Starstalker wasn't angry, it was lost. Confused. Trapped in an environment it couldn't understand. By showing it a way back to familiar territory, we turned a potential disaster into a learning opportunity. The story spread quickly through the galaxy's academic community. The security footage of a human calmly sitting before one of space's most dangerous predators became required viewing in xenobiology courses. The Starstalker was successfully guided to the spacecraft bay and released back into space, where long-range trackers showed it returning to its normal hunting patterns. A month later, the Galactic Academy's Xenobiology department had a new permanent professor. Mark's class was now the most popular on campus, with a waiting list spanning multiple star systems. Students came not just to learn about handling dangerous creatures, but to understand the human perspective that made it possible. "The galaxy is full of barriers between species," Mark told his expanded class, Shadow still faithfully by his side. "Language barriers, physical barriers, psychological barriers. But Earth taught us something valuable: every barrier can be crossed if you're willing to learn, to understand, and to show respect." He smiled as he pulled up the day's lesson plan. "Now, who's ready to learn about Earth's honey badgers?" The alien students leaned forward eagerly, their various appendages ready to take notes. They had learned that when this human smiled that way, something incredible was about to happen. And as always, Shadow's ears perked up, ready for whatever new adventure awaited them in the endless pursuit of understanding between species. Above the Academy, through the repaired crystal dome, the purple sky sparkled with stars. Somewhere out there, a Starstalker glided between solar winds, perhaps remembering the strange creatures who had shown it the way home. In the vast expanse of space, barriers between species were breaking down one lesson at a time, thanks to humanity's unique gift for understanding the galaxy's most dangerous inhabitants.